You know, in all my cycles, serving with the Galactic Assembly's Military Evaluation Committee, I've seen some truly absurd things. I once watched a Threxian ambassador accidentally swallow his own translation device. Don't ask how. The physics still don't make sense, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the day humanity decided to show us what they considered modern ballistic weaponry. Let me set the scene for you, because this is too good not to share properly. It was cycle 47,082 of the standard assembly calendar. Earth had been a member world for exactly, about 6 months? 6 months. These bipedal mammals had barely figured out faster than light travel, were still using chemical propulsion for half their planetary defense grid. And somehow, they'd convinced the assembly that they deserved a seat at the big kids' table. The vote had been close. I'll admit that much. The Kethran delegation nearly had an aneurysm trying to block it. I was stationed on Outpost Meridian-7, a weapons testing facility orbiting a dead moon in the Tartarus sector. Beautiful place if you ignore the fact that it's essentially a giant shooting range, where civilizations come to measure whose plasma accelerator is more compensatory. My designation is Observer Technician Vrell'na. Yes, that's actually my name. No, I don't care if you can pronounce it. And my job was simple. Watch various species fire increasingly ridiculous weapons at reinforced targets. Record the data. Try not to die from boredom. The Kethrans had just finished demonstrating their new ion cascade disruptor. Very impressive, very expensive, absolutely devastating at ranges up to 3 astronomical units. They were preening like someone had just told them they'd won the genetic lottery. Their lead weapons designer, an insufferable character named Tor'mek, kept going on and on about the elegant fusion of quantum field manipulation and directed energy principles. I wanted to shove him out an airlock, but that's frowned upon in polite society. Then the humans showed up. Oh, you should have seen the looks on everyone's faces when their delegation walked. Well, more like swaggered into the observation deck. 5 of them. Captain Yuki Nakamura. A woman with eyes so sharp I'm pretty sure she could cut through hull plating just by staring at it. Lieutenant Commander Jamal Washington, built like he'd been carved from a mountain, and somehow still moving with the grace of a dancer. Dr. Priya Kapoor, their chief weapons engineer, who had this unsettling habit of smiling at the most inappropriate moments. Sergeant Kenji Sato, their demolitions expert, who I later learned had once blown up an asteroid just to see what would happen. And Corporal Elena Volkov, their systems operator, who hadn't blinked in the entire 30 minutes I'd been watching her. Not once. I timed it. "Greetings, esteemed colleagues," Captain Nakamura said, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent from the Eastern Federation territories. "We appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate humanity's contribution to modern warfare." Tor'mek actually laughed. Out loud. In front of everyone. "Oh, this should be entertaining," he said, his mandibles clicking in that way. Kethrans do when they're being particularly condescending. "Tell me, Captain, did you bring your, what do you call them, powder weapons? Bang sticks?" The other observers chuckled. The Vrell'na representative made a sound like escaping gas, which I think was supposed to be laughter. Even I'll admit I was skeptical. Humanity's weapons technology was, well, let's just say charmingly antiquick, is being generous. They were still using kinetic rounds, actual physical projectiles, in an age where most civilizations had moved on to energy weapons 3,000 cycles ago. But here's the thing about humans that I was about to learn. They don't get embarrassed. They get creative. Dr. Kapoor stepped forward, that unsettling smile spreading wider across her face. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying a tone that should have been a warning to all of us, "we've prepared something a bit more interesting than our standard firearms. We call it the electromagnetic mass accelerator, though the technical teams prefer the designation EMX-7. She paused, and I swear her eyes twinkled with something that might have been madness. "But everyone back home just calls it the railgun." Railgun. The word meant nothing to me then. Oh, how naive I was. "A railgun," Tor'mek repeated, his translator struggling with the human term. "How, Timothy? You're still relying on physical projectiles." Oh, absolutely, Lieutenant Commander Washington chimed in, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Physics is physics, my friend. Turns out, accelerating a solid object to significant fractions of light speed, still pretty effective, regardless of how primitive the concept might seem. Wait. Had he just said, fractions of light speed? I heard myself ask. My translation matrix probably making me sound as incredulous as I felt. Sergeant Sato grinned, and let me tell you, when a human shows you all their teeth like that, it's not actually a friendly gesture, no matter what their cultural databases claim. 7% of light speed to be exact. We've clocked projectiles at 0.07 C in controlled tests. Today, we're planning to push it a bit further. The observation deck went silent. Not the comfortable silence of professionals awaiting a demonstration, but the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they might have made a terrible mistake. 7% of light speed. Using what amounted to electromagnetic rails and a hunk of metal, that's, the Vrell'na observer started, their translator struggling. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would require a fusion reactor. Yeah, Dr. Kapoor interrupted cheerfully. Good thing we brought one. Well, technically it's a compact tokamak design, 4th generation, running deuterium-tritium fuel. We can sustain the magnetic field for approximately 47 seconds before we need to cycle the coolant system. More than enough time for what we have planned. I should mention that most species' shipboard weapons draw power from standard antimatter reactors or zero-point energy tanks. The humans had strapped what amounted to a miniaturized star to their weapon, because of course they had. Shall we begin? Captain Nakamura asked, though it wasn't really a question. Corporal Kov was already interfacing with the outpost's targeting systems, her fingers dancing across her datapad with practiced efficiency. The viewing screens lit up, showing the designated target, a standard assembly combat vessel hull plate, rated for Class 9 impacts, capable of withstanding direct hits from most conventional plasma weapons. It floated in the void approximately 10,000 kilometers from the firing platform, a distance considered safe for most demonstrations. The humans had brought their weapon aboard a modified cargo hauler, and as the external cameras focused on it, finally got my first look at the thing they'd so casually called a railgun. It was underwhelming, honestly. Just a long, cylindrical structure extending from the hauler's cargo bay, maybe 40 meters in length, surrounded by what appeared to be cooling systems and power conduits. No glowing energy matrices, no exotic matter containment fields, no quantum fluctuation dampeners, just metal, magnets, and increasingly concerning amounts of electrical cabling. EMX-7 powering up, Volkov reported, her voice flat and professional. Capacitor banks charging. 80%, 90%, full charge achieved. Fusion reactor stable. Magnetic field generators online. Projectile loaded, Sato added. Mass, 15 kilograms. Composition, tungsten carbide penetrator with depleted uranium sabot. Because why not, right? Why not indeed? I was beginning to understand why the human concept of safety regulations seemed so much more paranoid than other species. They needed them. Target acquisition locked, Nakamura said, her eyes fixed on her display. Range 10,000 kilometers. Solution calculated. Firing sequence initiated. Wait, Tor'mek interjected, his earlier amusement replaced with something that might have been concern. Shouldn't we? Firing in 3, 2, 1. What happened next is difficult to describe, partially because it happened so fast that our sensors almost missed it, and partially because the human weapon did something that shouldn't have been possible with primitive kinetic technology. There was no dramatic buildup, no charging sound, no visual warning. One moment, the railgun was idle. The next 15 kilograms of tungsten carbide was screaming through the void at nearly 8% of light speed. They'd exceeded their own estimates, and the electromagnetic pulse from the discharge lit up every sensor in the observation deck. Like someone had set off a small star, the projectile crossed 10,000 kilometers in approximately 0.4 of a second. The target never stood a chance. I've seen plasma weapons punch through armor. I've watched exotic matter warheads collapse ship hulls like tinfoil. I once witnessed a Zelteri antimatter lance cut a destroyer clean in half. But I had never seen anything quite like this. The tungsten penetrator hit the hull plate with such force that it didn't just penetrate, it vaporized the impact point instantly, the kinetic energy converting to heat and pressure in a nanosecond. The hull plate, rated to withstand gigajoules of directed energy, simply ceased to exist in a sphere approximately 40 meters in diameter. The rest of the plate was shredded by the shockwave, fragmenting into an expanding cloud of superheated debris that our sensors registered as several thousand degrees above absolute zero. But here's the really terrifying part. The projectile kept going. It punched through the hull plate, through the empty space behind it, and according to our tracking systems, continued on its trajectory for another 3 astronomical units, before our sensors finally lost track of it. One shot. One 15-kilogram hunk of metal, accelerated by nothing more than electromagnetic rails and human stubbornness. One target that had been rated to survive battles with ships 10 times humanity's current combat classification. Deleted from existence in less than half a second. The observation deck remained silent for exactly 5 seconds. I know because I was still staring at the chronometer, my brain trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Then Tor'mek, blessed Tor'mek, finally found his voice. That's not possible. The kinetic energy alone would require. You'd need to. The power requirements are substantial, yes. Dr. Kapoor agreed, still wearing that unsettling smile. The EMX-7 draws approximately 18 terawatts during the acceleration phase. It's why we need the fusion reactor. Chemical batteries just don't cut it for this kind of work. 18. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Most ship-mounted plasma accelerators drew maybe 3 terawatts at peak firing. The humans had built a weapon that required 6 times that much power and mounted it on what amounted to a cargo ship. We should probably mention, Lieutenant Commander Washington added helpfully, that the EMX-7 is actually our medium-range railgun design. We're currently working on the EMX-12 for ship-to-ship combat at extended ranges. That one's going to, well, let's just say the power requirements are a bit more significant. They wanted to build a bigger version. Captain Nakamura turned to face the observation deck, her expression professionally neutral, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. The beauty of kinetic weapons, she said, is their simplicity. No exotic particles, no quantum field manipulation, no antimatter containment protocols, just mass, acceleration, and physics. It's reliable, it's scalable, and best of all, she gestured toward the debris field that had once been our target. It's very, very difficult to defend against. She was right, and everyone in that room knew it. Energy shields could deflect plasma, could disperse particle beams, could even redirect exotic matter to some degree. But a solid projectile moving at relativistic speeds, conservation of momentum, didn't care about your shield technology. Kinetic energy was kinetic energy, and at those velocities, even hitting the projectile with countermeasures just meant you were dealing with multiple smaller projectiles still carrying most of that original momentum. Of course, Dr. Kapoor continued, her tone becoming almost conversational, the EMX-7 has some limitations. The barrel requires replacement after approximately 300 shots due to material stress. The capacitor banks need a full recharge cycle between firings, which takes about 90 seconds. And the fusion reactor requires a complete cooldown and maintenance check every 24 hours of operation. She paused, that smile returning. But we're working on those issues. The Mark II prototype should have most of those problems sorted out. They were already working on an improved version. Because one weapon that could delete targets from existence in under a second apparently wasn't enough. The silence that followed Dr. Kapoor's casual mention of a Mark II prototype was the kind of silence you get right before someone says something monumentally stupid. I had a feeling I knew who that someone was going to be. I was right. This is absurd, Tor'mek declared, his mandibles clicking rapidly, a sign of agitation in Kethran's. You expect us to believe that humanity, A species that only achieved faster than light travel 3 cycles ago has somehow revolutionized weapons technology using magnets and electricity. This is nothing more than an elaborate trick, a hoax designed— "Oh, for the love of Sergeant Sato," muttered, pulling up something on his datapad. "Corporal Volkov, please tell me we brought extra projectiles." Volkov didn't even look up from her console. "We brought 12, Sergeant." Captain Nakamura approved the expanded ammunition load before departure. "Fantastic. Let's fire another one." Now, here's where things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean the kind of interesting that makes you reconsider your life choices and wonder if your insurance covers acts of human stupidity. Because Captain Nakamura didn't object. She didn't suggest a more diplomatic approach. She didn't recommend further discussion with the assembly observers. She just smiled and said, "Target selection? There's an abandoned Kethran destroyer hulk about 50,000 kilometers spinward," I heard myself saying. Because apparently my sense of professional detachment had decided to take a vacation. Decommissioned 2 cycles ago, scheduled for salvage next month. Hull integrity is still rated at 90%. 50,000 kilometers. 5 times the distance of their first shot. An actual warship hull, not just a test plate. I was either a genius or an idiot, and I was leaning heavily toward the latter. Tor'mek's skin tone shifted to a pale blue. The Kethran equivalent of going white as a sheet. That's military property. You can't just— Actually, Captain Nakamura interrupted smoothly, pulling up a holographic document. According to Assembly Regulation 47 Charlie, subsection 12, any decommissioned military vessel in designated testing zones can be utilized for weapons evaluation purposes with proper authorization, which we obtained. Oh, about 3 hours ago. Signed by the Assembly Defense Coordination Committee. She tilted her head slightly. "Your signature is on the approval, Tor'mek. Did you not read the full briefing packet?" The sputtering sounds that came from the Kethran delegation were priceless. Absolutely priceless. Turns out, Tor'mek had rubber-stamped the authorization without reading it. Probably assuming the humans wouldn't have anything worth testing. Assumption. The mother of all catastrophic errors. "Retargeting systems," Volkov reported, her fingers already dancing across her interface. "New target acquired. Distance 50,200 kilometers. Hull composition, standard Kethran military-grade durasteel. Reinforced bulkheads, double-layer plasma shielding mounts currently inactive. Calculating trajectory. Solution lock. Capacitor banks recharged," Sato added. "Fusion reactor holding steady at optimal temperature. New projectile loaded. This one's got a little surprise built in. Tungsten core with a shaped explosive payload, designed to detonate after penetration. We call it the hammer and chisel configuration. Of course they'd put explosives in it, because a projectile moving at 8% of light speed apparently needed more destructive potential. All stations green, Dr. Kapoor confirmed. EMX-7. Ready for second firing sequence. Power draw will spike to approximately 19.3 terawatts this time. We're pushing the acceleration a bit harder for the increased range." The observation deck had gone from skeptical to utterly transfixed. Even the Vrell'na observer had stopped making their gas escape sounds and was staring at the screens with what I assumed were all of their eyes. Hard to tell with Vrell'nas. They have a lot of them. Firing in 5, 4. This time I was ready for it. My secondary visual sensors were pre-focused on the electromagnetic discharge point. My data recorders set to maximum temporal resolution. I wanted to catch every microsecond of what was about to happen. Bun 2-1 firing. The electromagnetic pulse was even more intense this time. The increased power draw creating a cascade of energy that briefly overloaded 3 of my sensor arrays. The projectile left the railgun at, according to the telemetry that scrolled across my vision, 8.3% of light speed, trailing a wake of ionized particles and Cherenkov radiation as it tore through space. 50,000 kilometers in approximately 2 seconds. I want you to understand something about kinetic impacts at relativistic speeds. They don't behave like normal collisions. At those velocities, Matter stops acting like solid objects and starts behaving more like fluid, or in extreme cases, like light itself. The atoms don't have time to move out of the way through normal mechanical processes. Instead, they're compressed, superheated, and often transmuted into different elements entirely from the sheer pressure and energy involved. The hammer and chisel projectile hit the decommissioned destroyer amidships, right where the primary reactor housing would have been if the ship were still operational. What happened next was, well, let me put it this way. I've been an observer technician for 47 cycles. I've documented thousands of weapons tests. I've seen enough explosions to fill a database the size of a small moon. But I had never, ever seen anything quite like this. The tungsten penetrator punched through the destroyer's outer hull like it wasn't even there. Because at those speeds, from the projectile's perspective, it might as well have been tissue paper. It continued through 6 decks, the command module, the main structural supports, and out through the opposite side of the hull in approximately 0.003 seconds. Then, the shaped explosive detonated. Inside the ship, the explosion, shaped by human engineering to maximize internal damage, tore through the destroyer's superstructure, like someone had set off a miniature supernova in its guts. Bulkheads that had been rated to withstand direct torpedo impacts shredded like foil. Support beams that could have held up a small building twisted and snapped. The entire midsection of the destroyer simply came apart, fragmenting into a rapidly expanding sphere of debris that glowed white-hot from the residual energy. But here's the thing that made my brain hurt. The ship was in 2 pieces now, the fore and aft sections separating from each other, and both sections were spinning not from the explosion, but from the angular momentum imparted by a 15-kilogram projectile, hitting at relativistic speeds. The laws of physics had taken a simple kinetic impact and turned it into a catastrophic structural failure that would have made any engineer weep. And the projectile, according to our sensors, it was still going, having lost perhaps 30% of its mass to the impact and explosion. It was currently on a trajectory that would take it clear out of the Tartarus sector entirely. The observation deck was silent again, but this time it was different. This wasn't shock or disbelief. This was the silence of military minds rapidly recalculating every strategic assumption they'd ever made about human combat capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Washington broke the silence first, his voice carrying a tone of professional satisfaction. For the record, the destroyer was approximately 3 times the mass of a standard assembly frigate. The hammer and chisel configuration is designed for capital ship engagement, where you want to ensure maximum internal damage rather than just punching clean through. We also have the needle configuration for precision strikes, Dr. Kapoor added helpfully, and the scatter shot for area denial that one fragments into 96 sub-projectiles about 3 seconds after firing, each carrying enough kinetic energy to disable a fighter craft. Very useful for point defense applications. They had variants, multiple variants, each one designed for specific tactical applications. The humans hadn't just built a railgun, they'd built an entire weapons platform with modular ammunition types. How? The Vrell'na observer finally managed to vocalize. How is this economically feasible? The power requirements alone must be astronomical. The infrastructure needed to support such weapons. Actually, Captain Nakamura said, and I really should have known by now that whenever a human says "actually" in that particular tone, you're about to have your worldview adjusted. The railgun is significantly more cost-effective than equivalent energy weapons. The projectiles are cheap, just refined metals and some basic explosives. No exotic matter, no antimatter containment, no quantum field generators. The fusion reactor is expensive, yes, but it's also powering the rest of the ship's systems, so you're getting double duty from the investment. Sergeant Sato pulled up a holographic cost comparison that made me want to recalculate my entire understanding of military economics. A single Kethran ion cascade disruptor costs approximately 40 million credits to manufacture and maintain over a standard cycle. Our EMX-7, including the fusion reactor, ammunition, and maintenance, costs about 12 million for the same operational period. And we can fire 3 rounds per minute once we've got the power infrastructure in place. compared to your, what was it, Tor'mek, one shot every 40 seconds. Tor'mek looked like he'd been hit with a railgun himself. His mandibles had stopped clicking. His skin had gone from pale blue to a concerning shade of gray. He was staring at the debris field that had once been a Kethran destroyer, with what I can only describe as existential horror. Because here's what everyone in that observation deck had just realized. Humanity hadn't just shown us a weapon. They'd shown us that they'd been paying attention, learning, studying every energy weapon system in the assembly arsenal, and then they'd ignored all of it in favor of upgrading something we'd all dismissed as primitive: kinetic weapons. Railguns. Magnetic acceleration of solid matter. Technology so simple, so straightforward, that most species had abandoned it millennia ago in favor of more sophisticated solutions. And the humans had looked at that abandoned technology and asked a very dangerous question. But what if we made it better? I think, I said slowly, my translation matrix probably not conveying just how much recalibration my worldview was currently undergoing, that the Assembly Defense Coordination Committee is going to want a full briefing on this technology. Already scheduled, Captain Nakamura replied. We've got a presentation prepared for next cycle. We'll be covering the EMX-7, the EMX-12 development program, and our preliminary designs for the EMX-12. She paused, and I swear I saw a glint of something absolutely terrifying in her eyes. The 20 is designed for planetary defense applications. We're projecting velocities around 12% of dit speed with a 200-kilogram projectile. The math gets a bit scary at that point, but the targeting solutions are surprisingly straightforward. 12%. 200 kilograms. I didn't need to run the calculations to know that such a weapon could probably crack a moon if you aimed it right. Of course, Dr. Kapoor added, her smile never wavering, we're also working on some really interesting applications for civilian infrastructure. Turns out, the same electromagnetic acceleration principles can be used for launching cargo into orbit, deep space mining operations, even emergency evacuation systems. The Peace Corps has already submitted a request for scaled-down versions to help with disaster relief on high-gravity worlds. Civilian applications. They were going to commercialize railgun technology. Because of course they were. Corporal Volkov finally looked up from her console, her expression as neutral as ever. Captain, the EMX-7 cooldown cycle is complete. We have 10 projectiles remaining if the assembly observers would like to see additional demonstrations. The assembled observers exchanged glances. I could practically see the collective thought process. Did we want to watch the humans delete more targets from existence? Or did we want to preserve what little remained of our strategic confidence? Tor'mek surprised me by speaking up first. I believe we've seen quite enough. His translator was struggling with the emotional subtext, but I'm pretty sure the underlying tone was something between grudging respect and abject terror. The Kethran delegation will be recommending immediate evaluation of human weapons technology for potential assembly-wide procurement. From condescension to procurement recommendation in the span of 30 minutes. That might have been a record. The other observers murmured their agreement, each delegation suddenly very interested in obtaining technical specifications, licensing agreements, and development partnerships. The Vrell'na wanted to discuss power distribution optimization. The Zeltari were asking about magnetic field stability. Even the normally aloof Draken Imperium representative was inquiring about miniaturization possibilities for their fighter craft. Captain Nakamura handled it all with professional grace, handing out data packets, scheduling follow-up meetings, and making careful notes about each delegation's specific interests. But I caught the look she exchanged with her team, the brief moment of shared satisfaction that said clearer than any words, "We just changed the game." And they had. In the span of one demonstration, with 2 shots from a weapon most species would have dismissed as archaic technology, humanity had proven something fundamental about warfare that we'd all forgotten. Sometimes, the simplest solution is the most effective one. As the observation deck began to clear, delegations hurrying off to contact their respective governments and military commands, I found myself standing beside Dr. Kapoor, both of us staring at the debris field floating in the void. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said, not looking at me. "We almost didn't bring the railgun. The Earth Defense Force was going to send a demonstration of our new plasma lance technology instead. Much more modern, they said. More in line with assembly standards. She chuckled, a sound that still carried that edge of unsettling mirth. But then someone asked, what if we showed them that we can beat them at their own game with something they've already dismissed? And here we are. Here we are indeed, I agreed. You've just made every military strategist in the assembly reconsider their entire weapons development program. Good, she said simply. Maybe now they'll stop underestimating us because we still like things that go bang instead of whoosh. She turned to face me, and her expression softened slightly. We're not trying to prove we're better than everyone else, you know. We're just trying to prove we deserve to be here, at this table, with all of you. And sometimes that means showing that primitive and effective aren't mutually exclusive concepts. I watched as the human delegation packed up their equipment, Sergeant Sato whistling some kind of Earth melody while Corporal Volkov ran final diagnostics on the railgun systems. Lieutenant Commander Washington was already on a communication link with Earth, probably reporting their success. Captain Nakamura was reviewing the data from both shots. Her expression focused and analytical. They were so human. Proud of their work, yes, but not arrogant. Confident in their technology, but still eager to learn and improve. They'd just demonstrated a weapon that could reshape modern warfare, and they were treating it like a successful engineering project, rather than a galaxy-shaking revelation. And that, more than the railgun itself, more than the shattered destroyer or the vaporized hull plate, what made me realize something important. We hadn't just underestimated human weapons technology. We'd underestimated humans. 3 months later, the Assembly Defense Coordination Committee approved the first joint development program with Earth, a cooperative initiative to integrate railgun technology into the Assembly's standard military infrastructure. 5 species immediately signed licensing agreements. 12 more submitted requests for technical consultations. And somewhere in the research and development facilities of Earth, engineers were already working on the EMX-20, pushing the boundaries of what primitive kinetic weapons could achieve. I filed my report with the standard classification, Assessment of Human Weapons Technology, Railgun Demonstration. But in my private notes, the ones I keep for my own records, I wrote something different. Today, I watched humanity prove that sometimes, the oldest ideas, refined with new understanding and human stubborn creativity, can be more revolutionary than any exotic technology. They took something we'd all abandoned millennia ago and turned it into the future of warfare. I can't wait, and I'm terrified to see what they come up with next. Because that's the thing about humans, isn't it? They don't accept that something is obsolete just because everyone else says so. They ask why not, when everyone else says why bother. And sometimes, just sometimes, they show the entire galaxy that we'd been thinking about problems in entirely the wrong way. So yeah, they thought human weapons were primitive, right up until that railgun fired. Now we know better. And honestly, I think that's exactly what they were counting on.